Born plain Sam Crockett on the 24th of September 1859 and raised by his maternal grandparents, who were tenant farmers at Little Duckery. Put simply, when talking about Galloway's literary heroes, Samuel Rutherford Crockett is the biggest, and I think the best. In this brief introduction to the man who wrote over 30 novels set in his native Galloway, I hope to show you how, with a combination of historic maps and his novels, you can explore Galloway and discover its literary landscape and heroes for yourself. This illustration is from Crockett's children's novel Sweetheart Travellers, which features bicycling trips round the Glen Kens with his young daughter on a Humber Beeston tricycle. My own relationship with maps is perhaps best illustrated by this one. The place I'm interested in is invariably in the creases of the map, in this case Little Duckery. It was from here that Crockett set out on many adventures as a child, and which he later wrote about. I've ringed Cairn Edward Hill here, as this is the name he reappropriated for Castle Douglas in his fiction. I believe that on a clear day you could see CD from the top of the hill. If you look at the route south along the loch Crockett passed on his way to school, which he writes about as Loch Greenock in novels including Kit Kennedy, you'll see that on this 1870s map, contemporary with his childhood, it is named Greenock. Crockett uses this old name, but as early as the 1850s it was undergoing a transformation, as this map shows. You can see it called Loch Greenock or Wood Hall, while by 1895 it was marked as Woodhall Loch, the name it retains today. Crockett often uses historic names in his fiction. He also has a habit of reciting some places, but when you do find his locations, his descriptions are invariably very accurate. Crockett is a great author to take with you on an exploration of your own in Galloway. Historic maps can be really helpful in finding the reality behind the fiction, and there are all kinds of clues to Galloway's history and geography to be discovered in Crockett's Galloway novels. We're spoilt for choice in exploring Galloway with Crockett, but I've picked just a couple of locations from just one of his novels to give you a taste. Men of the Moss Hags was published 125 years ago, first in Good Words magazine in 12 instalments, and then in a 56-chapter novel. It was Crockett's third Galloway novel, and his first published as a full-time professional writer. He had left the ministry in January of 1895, so that Men of the Moss Hags was in no small part a transformational work. An historical adventure romance, the action takes place in the killing times of the late 17th century and follows the fortunes of the barely fictional cousins Will and Wat Gordon of Earlstoun and Balmagee, who find themselves on opposing sides of Scotland's bloody civil war. The events are given a Gallovidian flavour and in the process offer a unique perspective on the lives of the Covenanters. Crockett's writing style is to take ordinary characters and place them in the foreground of his stories, while the bigger historic characters, such as Claverhouse, Richard Cameron and Alexander Pedden the Prophet, are given bit parts. Inevitably, Crockett takes some liberties with the history. He's writing fiction after all, but he does draw from historical fact. In fact and fiction, Will Gordon is the younger brother of Sandy the Bull Gordon, both sons of William Gordon of Earlstoun, who was killed at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1679. This action frames the story, but Crockett adds adventure and romance to the history. And this can be particularly useful when the maps of the time are, well, somewhat empty, as this map from the 1660 shows. A later map shows Earlstoun House itself, which Crockett describes thus. The house of Earlstoun sits bonny above the waterside, and there are few fairer waters in this land than the Ken water. Also, it looks its bonniest in the early morning when the dew is on all sides. And this 1895 map shows the castle and the great oak as they would have been when Men of the Moss Hags was published. While Men of the Moss Hags ranges widely through Galloway from Earlstoun to Balmagee and as far west as Wigton, another key location is the Session Stone near Shallock-on-Minnoch, as this modern map illustrates. Crockett can take us there. For us, who were used to making a herd's track across the hills, it was not a long step over the moors from McCatterick to the foot of the Craig Facey of Shallock, where the general meeting of the societies was to take place, but it was a harder matter for my mother. She needed help over every little brink of a peat brow, and as we passed Tonskeen, where there's a herd's house in the wild, far from man and very quiet with God, I ran to get her a staff, which the shepherd's goodwife gladly gave. Soon we left the strange unsmiling face of Loch McCatterick behind, and took our way towards the rocky clint up which we had to climb. We went by the rocks that are called the Rig of Carclach, where there's a pass less steep than in other places, up to the long wild moor of the Shalloch on Minnoch. But when we got to the broad plain top of the Shalloch hill, it was easier to go forward, though at first the ground was boggy, so that we took off our stockings and walked on the driest part. We left the burn of Knocklach on our left, playing at keekbogles among the heather and bent, now standing stagnant in pools, now rindling clear over slaty stones, and again disappearing altogether underground like a hunted covenanter. Crockett continues to tell us of the conventicle. As soon as we came over the brow of the hill, we could see the folk gathering. Over the short brown heather of the tops, the groups of wanderers came, even as we were doing ourselves, past the lonely copse at the Rowan Tree, by the hillside track from Straighton, up the little runlet banks where the heather was blushing purple. They wended their ways, all setting towards one place in the hollow. There, already gathered, a black cloud of folk under the rickle of stones that runs slidingly down from the steep bow of Craig Facey. As we drew nearer, we could see the notable session stone, a broad flat stone overhanging the little Puri burn that tinkles and lingers among the slaty rocks, now shining bone white in the glare of the autumn sun. I never saw a fairer place, for the heights about are good for sheep, and all the other hills distant and withdrawn. This description really brings the landscape to life. I wonder whether the cairn on this 1850s map is the session stone. Crockett describes the landscape accurately. He says, opposite the session stone was a wide heathery amphitheatre, where, as on tiers of seats, rows of men and women could sit and listen to the preachers. The Covenanters are long gone, but the stone remains. You don't have to be a fiction lover to get a lot from Crockett's novels. You just need to have a love of Galloway's places. Personally, I like to think of the relationship between Crockett's fiction and modern fiction as analogous to that between an historic map and a contemporary OS map. In both cases, you need to put in some effort to read them well. If you're looking for literary heroes in Galloway, Crockett's writing can provide you with many. So while this is just a thumbnail sketch, I hope I've shown that Crockett's fiction can be used as maps into the past, and the reward, I think, is as close to time travel in Galloway as any of us are likely to get. I'll leave you with his own thoughts on the matter. Which reminds us that as well as writing about Gallovidian heroes, Crockett himself is the foremost of Galloway's literary heroes.